And it's welcome back to We Love Ugly Data, the Deep Analysis podcast. This is episode 38, I think. But more importantly, it's also Series 5, Episode 4, if you're counting that way. But in a way that I'm surprised I remember I count, it's the 3rd anniversary of this podcast. It started in April 2023. If you go back and look at that episode, I was here because I'm always here. And really, it makes sense because all my stuff's here. Alan was there. Hi, Alan.
Hello.
Except you were in Brazil. I looked like I was presenting the podcast like at gunpoint. I was doing it against my will. But anyway, so that's three years of this podcast. Congratulations! I should have bought some party poppers for us both.
Yeah, we should have. Yeah.
But anyway,
yeah.
That's the numbering thing. If you're thinking, how is it the 3rd birthday if it's episode 38? Don't. I'm not going back and recounting them because there's always a possibility I might have to renumber episodes. So let's just go. It's episode 38 and it's the 3rd birthday. And ask no more questions and we move on to the format. And the format, as we know, has never changed. It's 3 topics and 30 minutes. We try to keep to 3 topics always. We never keep to 30 minutes, although we do try. And the first of our topics this month, Alan, we've got you here at home in Philadelphia, but it's like a small visit home amongst a bunch of other travel. And last week you were at Salesforce TDX, so Salesforce's developer conference in San Francisco. And you've written a blog post about that. I picked up a few little highlights from the post. Obviously, this is the first opportune moment to go. Of course, all the links will be in the show notes. So you don't have to start looking things up. There will be links to all of this stuff in here, possibly even while you're watching this. But certainly by the time you're watching or listening to this, there will be show notes you can get from the website. Anyway, so talk to me a little bit about TDX this year. Is this the 2nd or 3rd one you went to?
Question. I don't know. At least the 3rd. Yeah, it was very, very good. And actually, I know this sounds sort of suck-uppy, but they're well done. I mean, they put on a really good conference. I mean,
Salesforce did put on a good conference, yes.
Do a good job. And I you know what? I enjoyed this one more than the previous ones. Not that there's anything wrong with the previous ones, but I thought this one was super interesting because you see the journey that Salesforce is on. And I think the thing with Salesforce is on one level, which is very valid, but it's sort of superficial. You have Mark Benioff making grand announcements about everything that's going to happen and hoping nobody's going to check them in a year's time, right? And
which is what we're here for. We're here to check these things in a year's time.
It's fine, but I mean that's the job of a CEO, and you know, I mean he's quite the character. But when you go to the TDX conference, which to be clear to everybody, there's 2 big conferences: Dreamforce and TDX. Dreamforce is the very big one, huge. TDX is considerably smaller, though it's still not small, and this is for developers. And so, even in 3 years, what anybody can observe who's been there. It's been quite a dramatic journey. You know, 3 years ago, it was all about not sales admin, but Salesforce admins, I should say. Salesforce admins. I mean, and they have been the star. You know, they've been the community of Salesforce, and still are, to be clear, ever since, right? They've always been heralded, and Salesforce has done a lot of great things for people's careers, frankly. You know, I remember at 451 when we introduced Salesforce and Megan jumped on board it, and a lot of people have really benefited. It's been terrific, but there's been a shift.
So let's talk about those shifts. Let's talk about those shifts specifically, because there's 3. They're not the only 3 in the blog post. You can go and read the rest of it, but there are 3 I picked out. First of all, the Trojan horse isn't CRM, it's the data. What do you specifically mean by that? Because obviously there's a lot of arcane technical stuff going on with TDX, but give us a higher level idea of what you mean by this.
I think there was a couple of things. One, if we go back 3 or 4 years, the data in the CRM was it. That was the story. That's what you. That was it. That was it. That was the whole of TDX, frankly. I mean, maybe there were exceptions, but in general, that's the thing. Today, there's a recognition that the data in your Salesforce CRM is just part of the puzzle.
Right.
There's data everywhere. And we could talk, and we won't, but we could talk about the acquisition of MuleSoft and integrations into other systems. But the fact is, there is now a noticeable shift, and it's twofold. One, that the CRM data is not the be all and end all of the story, it's just part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And two, wow, isn't this really very, very complicated? That sounds like one and the same thing, and they are interlinked, but I think there's an understanding now that for Salesforce to grow, particularly with its whole agent focus, it has to be a platform for developers, and
right.
not just for CRM developers.
Right, and I think that's an important thing. I'll say this to someone who looked at this from a distance. I obviously wasn't on the ground with you because I don't fly anymore. I've retired from flying, so it's a bit difficult for me to get to San Francisco without going via the Panama Canal, and no one's going to pay for that. So I was watching this from a distance. Interestingly, the stuff that was pre-briefed to analysts was actually quite different to what actually turned out to be the big news. So actually, the headless stuff wasn't pre-briefed to us at all. That was the surprise on the day. But I think an important part, and I'll probably come back to this a little bit. TDX before Agentforce was about Salesforce and Salesforce data and manipulating Salesforce within Salesforce. Since Agentforce, it has increasingly been, with all respect to the people wearing the gold hoodies, this isn't for you. We need to get fresh blood out here into using this platform who are not Salesforce acolytes, who are not Salesforce users. They don't want to touch Apex code. They don't care about flows, right? They're used to using a bunch of other tools, and we need to make those tools accessible. And I think that's that's really what this headless thing, which isn't a product, by the way, it's an ethos. It's a concept which is encapsulated with a whole bunch of MCP stuff, a bunch of newer API stuff, opening up things for command line interfaces. So basically opening up the hooks and handles for getting at Salesforce to a whole raft of people who never would have touched it before. Was that really clear in what was going on the ground?
That was what I picked up sort of on the ground, in the sense that that was a key part of the conversation, is that Salesforce is now selling to, encountering and dealing with people they didn't before. And I can't remember if I put it in the blog or not, but one executive pretty much said out loud, actually, in fact, almost explicitly said, that the CTO, the CIO wasn't, Salesforce was just a product in their portfolio. Mm-hmm. Now they're trying to engage directly with them and saying, no, this should be the product. This is the platform for developing things. It's not just the CRM system. And I know we keep going about CRM. I know there are other products in the Salesforce line, but at the end of the day, Salesforce is known for one thing, it's CRM.
Even though more revenue comes from Service Cloud than Sales Cloud now.
Which, there we go, exactly. Sales Cloud, Marketing Cloud, Service Cloud, etc. Yeah, so we are aware of that, if anybody from Salesforce is listening, right? But they are basically, well, anyway, long story short, they're repositioning themselves as a developer platform. And it's a huge shift, really. And my concern, although it's not my personal concern, it's more, how do you bring those admins along with you, or don't you? It's an odd conference at the moment.
Yeah,
it's shifted from just 3 years ago, woohoo, aren't we amazing as admins, to the admins are really important, but these developers, and can an admin become a developer? So this was other part of the discussion.
Right. So one thing you know if you spend any time around Silicon Valley software companies, they do not need to be encouraged to talk to developers. And actually, most of the time they had to be discouraged from only talking to developers, right? So when we're talking about this here, we're talking about Salesforce TDX, We are not talking
Yes.
about what you'll feel at Dreamforce. That is and will continue to be a business-focused line of business-focused thing. So it's not that Salesforce as a platform is only become a developer-focused. That's not the case. What we're talking here is broadening out who the technical outreach goes from application owners and the business data owners within that. So the people who own the service data, people who own the sales data, to a lesser extent the people who own the marketing data, because that's very much a part of the business which is on the decline right now. After quite a while doing it, it's more how do we enforce the value of this? And it's exactly the same. If you sat in a ServiceNow conference, you'd be hearing exactly the same thing. So it's business applications. We've written about this, over last year or so, trying to break down the walled gardens that they spent so much time building up. To go, oh yeah, we still want to let all these people in, and we want to let in these new people in. So I think you're right. It does create a gap, because you still need the people to make Salesforce work, administrators. The hundreds of billions of workflows happen every year. They're absolutely fundamental to how people do it. And still, most Salesforce users are going to be using Salesforce, using the Salesforce UI now and in the foreseeable future. So let's not forget that as well.
Yeah, and as we said in the blog, it's a massive shift, and it's fascinating to watch. And I don't know how long we've got left on this section, but I will say, as I started off, really, hats off to them, really, because it's easy to pick it apart, but each time you go, I mean, a year isn't. I mean, everybody says, "Oh, a year's a long time in software." No, it's not. It's really not, and there's noticeable movement every year. I mean, when Salesforce committed to the Agentforce thing a few years back, I think we were all like, what? And you know what? They are following through on it, and they're learning as they go along, and they're surprisingly open about the challenges. So just to sort of finalize this, I suppose, the thing which just baffled me 3 years ago was, well, how's that going to work? That's not going to work. That's just not going to work. And they've learned, and they've been quite open about it, that, well, no, a lot of their assumptions were wrong. Enterprises are way more complex. Processes aren't documented. Data's a mess all over the place. It needs integration. It needs process mining. It needs this. It needs that. And they're learning it, and they are then moving on to educating their ecosystem that these aren't roadblocks, these are opportunities. We've just got to figure out how to navigate them.
Yeah, as you said,
the companies don't do that.
But as you said, I mean, they are introducing a degree of by opening up this in a way to external developers, to non-Salesforce core developers. They're having to create additional complexity they've never managed before. So I know your blog post is up on the screen for people who are watching this on the video thing, that this first iteration of the headless 360 concept includes over 60 NCPs. So that's 60 different sets of services which you can opt in to use or not use. A bunch of additional coding skills, 30 plus of those. So you still really have to have a very good understanding of Salesforce's application and data architecture in order to do that. They, as you said in your book, they like to talk about it being Lego, and Lego that's great. But if basically like using Lego a little bit, if you're not familiar with the shapes and how they click together, you've really got to understand what's the right Lego piece, Lego brick to use in the right circumstances. So I think you're introducing complexity because it's necessary to introduce complexity to do what you want to do, but at the same time, harnessing that in a way that makes it manageable, I think, is going to be a challenge. But I think from what you said, they're abundantly aware that's going to be a challenge, right?
Yeah, and I think that's what's encouraging, is each time you go, you realise that they've not only hit some roadblocks, but they're learning from them, and I think that's quite impressive. And I'm not trying to suck up to Salesforce. It's just some companies just get it in their head that the organizations they're working with, the people they're selling to, are wrong. Salesforce seems to get it that no, that's the reality. So how do we deal with that reality? And
we will be coming back to this topic from a different direction, the direction about billing and pricing and metering and all that stuff. Possibly next month. I would hopefully next month will be the right time to have that discussion. Not just Salesforce, but across the board. So if you're thinking, but you haven't talked about any of that, trust us. We've been talking a lot about it internally and writing a lot about it internally, and some of that will be coming up. Anyway, topic 2. It's the time of the year to talk about work intelligence, and subscribers will know, and people who follow us on social media will know that the 2026 version of the Work Intelligence Report made it out of the door last month. In fact, actually slightly before I think we recorded last month's IDP one with Dan, but because that was IDP focused, so we're mentioning it on this one. So that's now out. If you're unfamiliar with it, there will be a bunch of links. We're not going to tell you everything about it, but work intelligence is our way of encapsulating really automation software, everything from traditional BPM, BPA, RPA and workflow tools, process analysis tools, and low code and no code runtimes as well. So basically everything you would have used traditionally up to and including parts of agentic stuff to automate your business processes is what work intelligence is. Headlines for it. Obviously we encourage you to be a subscriber and get the report for free, but here's some stuff for free that you can have, which is the market as of Q1 2026, the latest numbers I worked on this year, is worth 18.6 billion. I think that's going to be growing to about 25.7 by 2031. So we're always looking kind of 5 years. It's kind of a 6-year forecast, but kind of a 5-year forecast, 5 projected years plus 1 year actual. Anyway, why we did that, I don't remember, but that was the reason I did it that way. Up on screen is an idea of what's in the report. So it's breakdown not only of the mechanics of the marketplace, what's going on in M&A, the individual compound growth rates for the different sub-markets, what's going inside those sub-markets, how geopolitical and IT budgetary effects changing the face of those markets. So there's a lot to chew on there. I think good 60 pages of quite dense information if you're really into that. Alan, I've been talking without breathing for a few moments. Work intelligence 2026.
Well, I think work intelligence is, I was going to say we, but largely you put out a concept for how this should all work. And this was sort of prior to the whole agentic craziness, right?
Yeah.
And it's held good is the point. And it's interesting because, yes, I was at TDX. I actually said to one of the Salesforce people there, it's funny how our vision of work intelligence is rapidly aligning with Salesforce's vision of things, that it's everything. So we won't get into probabilistic, deterministic stuff today, but how at the end of the day, agents aren't going to solve everything. That's just not the real world. That there's a mishmash of RPA tools, workflow, BPM, rules engines, process mining, task mining, dashboards, blah, blah, blah. And yes, AI agents, but it's
and
all
IDP, of course, let's not forget.
IDP, a very important part of it. So there's all these elements, and together, that's how you get to that much more automated environment. But one of these things alone, no, or even 2 or 3 of them alone together doesn't make it. It's a rich picture, and I think we can pat ourselves on the back, and I'll pat you virtually on the back. But we got this right.
I'd like to think so.
Actually aligning with what we outlined quite some years ago.
Well, again, we like to mark our own homework on how right or wrong we go on the number side. We'll come to that just in a second. But just up on the screen, just to give you an idea, this is the sort of second set of data I'll give you away for free here, which is a little bit about how the subsectors look in 2026 and how they're going for 2031. So you can see there's a difference between the work engines chunk, which is kind of like the traditional BPM stuff, and let's say the low code and no code, and which will continue to grow because ultimately, of course, an awful lot of agentic stuff is going to be driven by low code and no code ways of creating. In fact, we were seeing some demos of that this week from a vendor. But also the fact that despite these things continuing to grow and graph goes up, over time, the growth within the sector goes down. So actually by 2031 at the moment, we got, a growth factor of probably only just about 2%, 1.9% for the entire sector. So even, of course, in areas where growth is low, still sectors go up. And when you look at revenue of the size of we got inside that work engine thing, that's lots of money still going on, even with relatively low growth factors. So it's still a place where money is being made. As I said, last year for the first time, I actually started to do some public marking of homework to say, hey, we've been running this since 2023. It's now in 2025 and this year 2026. What do our predictions from 2023 look like now we've got actuals? There is a blog post from last year and one from this year where I put the data up, but here it is up on screen for people watching. We've got the graph here that shows all of our predictions from 2023 forward, and then the yellows are the actuals. So you can see how different the individual projections were from the actuals. I won't go through a lot of detail about it, but just to give you one number, the 2025 to 2026, so what we projected the market would look like in 2026 versus the size of the market in 2026, we were 0.99% out. So I think that's a reasonable margin of error. Even going back to what we said in 2023 to the actuals of 2026, I think we were around 5% out. And a lot geopolitically has happened between 2023 and 2026, which we don't need to go into. But one of the nice things about doing this is we have the data to compare it. I don't think anybody else does this and publicly marks our homework in this way, but I think it's important to do so, because if you're making real business decisions on what we say is going to happen, we should give you an idea of what our previous predictions, how they turned out, to give you a margin error to work with.
Yeah, and we always use this term defensible numbers. Yeah. Any numbers we probably should be defensible, and these are. And 5-10% out is defensible. That's good, because I've gone on about this before, but there are these sort of scam companies putting out these market forecasts. You see them almost every week now. They're turning them out, and they are not wrong by 5 to 10%. They are wrong by 200 to 300 to 500%, and that's not an exaggeration.
Yeah. Now we said
they are saying the markets are like 35 billion when they're not even 3 billion.
Well, we talked about this before. There is no one group of people who consumes analyst content than other analysts, right? So if you're writing about an area, we talked, Dan and I talked about this last month. If you're writing about an area on IDP and another analyst writes about IDP, you're going to want to read it. You maybe not going to want to read it until after you've published, but you're going to want an understanding. Am I aligning with my peers? Am I way out here in my ideas? Am I, or are they way out in their ideas? So we do consume a lot of other content where we are able to get hold of it. But it also means, as Alan said, sometimes we look at those numbers and go, well, I don't know how they gain that sum. That sum doesn't. We can't calculate how that sum comes from.
Well, we do know they make it up.
Well.
No, I mean, they make it up because the bigger the number, the more chance they have of selling it to somebody who wants to believe it. I mean, it's a scam. That's why I call them scams, because they're scams.
So there's that, and then there's the other side. There are pieces of I'll use air quotes for people looking, factual information here that sometimes you need to check. In fact, just before we came on this call, Alan and I were talking about a piece of work that we're working on right now that hopefully we'll be able to tell you about in a couple of months' time, because we're getting quite close to the point where we can start talking about it, and having to do secondary sourcing of information to make sure the numbers in spreadsheets that we're working on are defensible. We'll come to that a little bit again in a second. We saw in one of these reports, one of the headline bullet points in the PR for it was talking about an M&A transaction to say this market's really active because X bought Y for this amount on this date. And we thought, well, that transaction never took place. We checked. It would have been in our M&A numbers, which we'll come to in a moment, but that didn't take place. And secondarily, not only did the transaction took place, but the acquired party doesn't exist, which leads us to some interesting things about making it up. Is it being made up by hard-worked analysts, or is this a technological invention Are we seeing more AI-derived data as a way of actually knocking these reports out much faster?
Yeah, it's exactly what we're seeing. I mean, and if let's be frank, if you're a research mill and you're just churning out reports, you don't actually have subject matter experts writing them. How would they know when they go to an LLM and ask them to write a report or ask them to pull all of this data together, whether it's accurate or not? They don't know. And that it really is awful. There's so much of it going on. And I know we're going to talk about our M&A stuff in a second, but I will say, even for us, it's a challenge. Never mind LLMs, just regular search engines are throwing up stuff that looks incredibly convincing, only to find out it's not right.
So just so that you know what we did in this case, in this individual case, we went to the acquiring party in this false transaction and said, this has been published, you might want to do something about it, and then we stepped away. And we're not going to tell you who it is, and we're not going to tell you who's published it, but we thought that was the right thing to do, was go to tell you, this information is out there, you and I both know it's not correct, we'll leave it up to you whether you want to take action about it. Because as we know, zombie pieces of information like this tend to, or refer to them as zombies, because they have second and third and fourth lives as they get indexed and regurgitated. So I would not be surprised if all of a sudden we start to see versions of that false transaction pop up at some point again in the future, and we will have to drive a, you don't drive a stake in, yeah you do, you drive a stake in the heart of zombies. I've seen Buffy. That's all you need to do with these pieces of information. It involves stakes, yes.
I thought you'd cut zombies' heads off.
No, definitely, because Buffy definitely had a stake that she, you know, called Mr. Pointy, that she used to like dispatching zombies with. So anyway, this isn't really relevant to the discussion. Let's get on to the next bit. And it obviously, you know, some thought goes into a running order. And Alan mentioned that we're going to come onto our M&A and A&I. We are not good, as you know, about telling you all the stuff that we do. In fact, one of the good things about doing this pod every month for 38 episodes in 3 years, don't worry about the maths, is that it encourages us each month to go, what did we publish this month and what should we tell people about? And the trouble is, because of my strict adherence to the format, we've only got time to tell you about 3 things. And often there are more than 3 things that go on in any month that we publish. And because a lot of this is for subscribers only, you know, it's not there for everybody to get at. So we provide an awful lot of stuff that we don't necessarily tell you all about. In fact, we don't probably tell our subscribers all about it all the time as well. So there's a lot of value that you get from this. This sounds a bit like a sales pitch. It's not meant to be. It's just coming out that way. So one of the things that we do, and by we I mean Alan, is does a quarterly M&A roundup. It is a version of one of them. The version is up on the screen now. If you're thinking I can't read that, Matt, that's because I've blurred it out. Because this is valuable data, right? So some of the bits you can read on screen, some of the bits you can't. So, Alan, talk a little bit about what you put into the M&A roundup each quarter. So my subscribers certainly should be making sure that they are reading it.
Yeah, well, frankly, it's the only one of its kind, for one thing. Okay. Now, there be a reason for that. That's because nobody else is interested. But basically, well, it's a fair point, right? But basically, the unstructured data / document automation market, every quarter we go through and we find out, okay, what deals were done in this quarter, who bought who, basically. And it is a very, very tedious job that I take on, and I think it's important to do. Now, most of these deals go under the radar. They're not billion-dollar deals, right? They're small. Right, they're tuck-in investments, but collectively they tell a story of where the industry is at and where it's going.
Yeah.
At a sort of superficial level, this quarter, next quarter, presumably, you see a lot of stuff to do with agentic AI. Well, there was nothing there 3 years ago to do with agentic AI, right? What you also see in here, though, every quarter, actually, and I don't think it's going to change, is a surprising amount of small deals to do with good old-fashioned document record storage and management and everything. So for those who think that's gone away, it hasn't. There's a lot of money changing hands. There's plenty of business there. So we track those things. And then the other thing we try and do is then sort of do an overview of where we think things are at and pick up on the key stories. And this quarter, without going into too much detail, but Automation Anywhere is sort of planning some kind of reverse listing. And so we sort of analyze that a bit. We look at the incoming CEO of OpenText, who started officially this Monday.
And there is a blog post about that Alan wrote, and I'll put that in the show notes so you've got access to that.
And also then we touch also on Highland, which has been in private equity hands for coming up to 20 years.
Yeah.
Which is very unusual, and where they might be going. But all of that from an M&A perspective, right? So Highland hasn't done any significant deals since Alfredo Nuxio. OpenText, the most acquisitive of companies, doing deals seemingly every month at one point. They'd gone super quiet.
Well, in fact, started to unwind some of their previous acquisitions.
Exactly. So this kind of read, and I don't mean this as in a self-important way of putting it, but two things. One, this is really for the CEOs, the head of strategies, corporate development and stuff. And I believe it's the only one of its kind. It is the only one of its kind. I don't believe it is. It is. So it's actually a very valuable thing we do. But just to pick up on what we were talking about before, it's incredibly hard to put together, and much harder now than ever before. Because of these zombie things, right? So we know about a lot of these things. That's how we gather it, because we're in the industry. But to do the job properly, we also go looking, right? We go looking.
There's two factors. The zombie thing is an issue. The other one, it's just a bit of a hobby horse, so I try and keep this really, really short because I'm keeping with the stopwatch and we're already over time, unsurprisingly, is the fact that because way back in the early days of the web, when I was working as a web developer in the 1990s, we decided it was okay to not have broad adherence to things like doubling core metadata. And everyone went, oh, metadata is so boring, metadata is so boring. But because we didn't, we haven't got dates on documents. What we have to do is try and extract dates from HTML and assume that's when they took place. What that means is when you're looking at a transaction, right, it may have a date of today's date on it, but that might be related to a sidebar of content it's pulling in, not the actual date of the story in it itself. So you didn't have to double and treble source it to make sure that actually it's happening on the date it says it's happening, because we haven't got reliable metadata on dates. We basically screwed up. We screwed up the web really early, and then it got so big we couldn't stop it.
Well, and it's got a lot worse because content is now being regurgitated in this world of AI. For example, and I give this because this happens every quarter without fail. I see news articles dated like in April now, right? And it will be July or whatever when we get around to this again, that will tell you about the new acquisition of Documentum by OpenText. There's so many of them now. This is becoming really, really hard to do. But there we go. We do it anyway. I know it's worth it, because if there's one piece of content we put out to our subscribers, this one, if there is an error in it, and I have been caught out a couple of times, I won't lie, our readers clearly read them because they're very quick to point them out to us.
Yeah, I think it's this, and we've talked about it in the past. Maybe in the future we'll actually go into, maybe when the next crew comes out, the quarterly, we'll do a little bit about the crew as well, which is the subscriber only thing that we've mentioned in relation to the DA index in the past. But again, there's lots of stuff in the M&A report. There's lots of stuff in the crew, which we spend a lot of time doing, and it's really appreciated by people who read it. But outside a small niche of people, nobody knows it exists. So we need to get better about telling people about all the good work we do in private.
That's the plan.
That's it. We're going to stop there. We're way over time as usual. Next time there will be 3 more topics. I think we kind of almost worked out a running order while we're doing this one, didn't we? 3 more topics, 30 minutes to discuss them in. I'll be here. I haven't confirmed it, but I think Alan will find a time for you again, Alan, next month when you're not in Brazil or in Dallas or in Vegas or the various other places I know you're on.
Whilst I am in those places,
Well, of course.
if we do in Brazil, I'll try and get a backdrop of something that looks cool.
Well, we'll do that next month for the May edition. Again, thank you for joining us, and we will see you again next month.